As you can see, my needle's starting to climb and the pressure's starting to build in the coolant system. We have much deeper problems here, guys. It's either blown head gasket, cracked cylinder head, or a cracked cylinder wall. I don't need to see any more. The head's got to come off. Before I go too far, I just wanted to show you I got it jacked up, placed on jack stands, removed the right front tire. I want to start removing some of the coolant system hoses from up top. In order to do so, I'm going to have to drain the coolant system, correct? Under the vehicle towards the left side by the transmission on the radiator, you'll see a little pepcock, and it has a little drain port underneath it. So if I loosen up that pepcock, it'll drain the coolant system from the radiator. Sometimes you can't do these with your fingers. Oop. That's what happens if you go too far with it. You want to try to have some kind of control over it. Make sure the radiator cap's removed. Yeah, it's removed, guys, but one thing you gotta keep in mind too, if anybody placed any kind of sealant stuff in there, it plugs these up. There it goes. It seems kind of slow. Okay, as you hear, I still have the radiator drained in the coolant system. If you follow this upper hose over, you got your fill neck. Follow it down. You got your two retaining bolts that hold the upper radiator and fill neck to the thermostat housing. You got this overflow hose that goes to your expansion tank. We're going to take and remove this hose clamp, remove this overflow tube, then remove the two retaining bolts that hold that neck onto the thermostat housing. Like I mentioned, that's your expansion tube. Try to prevent anything from falling down in that intake. We'll be removing the intake to give us more space. It's just a matter of preference. Now I need my 10mm. This isn't the most user-friendly vehicle to work on. I'm just going to give you that fair warning. See, you got your thermostat. Those two retaining bolts, we don't want to lose them. I'm going to remove the upper hose completely. I like to give myself as much space as possible. It saves me time in the long run. But now it gives you a pretty straight shot to your fuel rail and your harness. So from here, I guess we could take and unplug all of our injectors. You can take the quick connect and remove it from your fuel rail, or we could just simply take the fuel rail, set it to the side. But what I'm going to do is disconnect the harness, relieve the fuel pressure, and disconnect the fuel line. Now in these fuel injector harnesses, you got these red locking tabs. You're going to want to pull them up. I'll give you a closer view once I get one unplugged. They're usually in a locked position that prevents you from unlatching the tab. And you pull it back and then you can unlatch it. So you just do that to all four of them. Down here you got a temperature sensor. It goes to your thermostat housing. I'll take and unplug that right away if you can get to it. Just wanted to give you a shot of that temperature sensor connector. Now, there is a main harness connector down there you could unplug under the manifold. However, I opted to just unplug the whole harness. We'll put it off to the side like so. Next, we want to take and remove the fuel line. However, there may be fuel pressure in this rail. So we want to take this end cap off. And just taking you can put a little jug here There's a schrader valve inside there, just push that in. Let the fuel pressure come off it, or hook up your fuel pressure adapter to it and bleed it off in a can. Make sure you have no sparks or anything. It's not going to be anything severe. Place a rag underneath it. Pressing the schrader valve, and the pressure is relieved. This fuel line is a quick connect. It has two little plastic tabs. Press them in. Remove the fuel line like so. There is some fuel in there. We'll get a rag. The throttle line is attached to the fuel line with this plastic clip. So I'm just going to take and put everything and tie it back. You see the style retainer on this fuel rail. Pretty straightforward. Oil dipstick has a retaining bolt with a 10mm head that screws up underneath the intake. Take and remove that. Then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 retaining bolts that hold the lower intake to the cylinder head. We're going to take and remove them next. Like I mentioned earlier, you got this 10mm retaining for the dipstick. It's a little tricky to get to if you have a 10mm ratchet wrench. Seems to work best. Now we're going to take a 10mm socket and ratchet, and the lower ones are a 1/2 inch, I believe. And you can do this with a ratchet wrench as well. Alright, now that I got all the retaining bolts removed, the two bottom ones were the hardest ones to get to, but really not bad. Oh no. Just take and remove the intake. I'm assuming somebody had this apart. Maybe not. It looks like someone put silicone on it. As you can see now with the intake removed, it really opens things up quite a bit. You look down here, you'll see some of the things that have to be removed. Like this heater hose, you got 3 retaining bolts for your power steering pump. It's nice that they come through the back side. So as you can see, that fender well, that inner fender well gives you no space whatsoever. One other thing to keep in mind, guys, if you're doing this job at home and you don't have a refrigerant recovery machine for the AC, to make this job easier, to give you better access, it's best to remove the refrigerant lines. So I already verified that this system is empty, so there must be a leak in here to begin with. It was missing one of the caps, so I was assuming somebody tried adding, even though it's the high side that's missing. It's kind of odd. However, to make life easier on you, remove these 2 retaining bolts. There's O-rings in here that should be replaced if you remove it. So you're going to need an O-ring kit. Gives you a lot more room, guys. Makes all the difference. Okay, if you come back under here on the passenger side, the right front, we're going to take and remove the serpentine belt. In order to do that, there is a spot where you can put a 3/8 ratchet, I believe, but we're turning in the tightening position of this bolt. So you simply just move the tensioner over and remove the belt like so. If you recall earlier, I mentioned if you didn't want to take and unplug each injector, you could reach underneath and unplug the main harness. Right here's the plug. It was on one of the studs. However, this does unplug and unhook out of this bracket, but it fights you a lot when you're reaching underneath, so I just unplug them and then unhook it later. Pretty much just push it in, pull it out, and there's the harness. Alright, now that I verified that the refrigerant is empty in this system, these are the O-rings you should replace whenever opening the system. It may not look like it gives you a lot of room, guys, but there's a bolt back here to remove this one bracket, and it's a real bear to get to if you don't. Alright, next I took and placed my jack under the oil pan with a block of wood, and I took the pressure off of the engine, just slightly jacked it up. Just a little bit. You don't want to lift the car up off the jack stand. I'm going to take and remove this upper motor mount. As you can see, you got two retaining bolts there, 15 millimeter. One retaining bolt there, which is an 18 millimeter. I'm going to take and zip them out real quick. Motor mount, place that off to the side. Okay, now what you'll notice here is everything's starting to really open up. However, there's this big bracket. See that heavy bracket? Goes around the power steering pump, acts as a power steering bracket as well. See the bolts that come from the back side? We'll have to take and remove that because this bracket has to come off in order to remove the timing belt and replace the timing belt. Therefore, we'll take and start removing the power steering pump. Now there's no method to this madness, guys. I know I'm not following this by the manual or whatnot. I've done a few of these and I just go at it and challenge one step at a time. This one, just using a 1/2 inch impact swivel. You can take and pull that dipstick out of there as well. If you forget to put it on prior to the intake, that's one of the steps you got to remember. And plus, there's a lot of dirt and debris down there. Really don't want to be doing that. Next, I want to take and remove this back retaining bracket, which looks like a 15 millimeter up here, and another one right down below. We'll take a closer look. 15 millimeter retaining bolt there, and one right down there. Alright. For some reason I thought I, in the past, moved that back here out of the way. However, I got plenty of room where it's at. So you actually could leave that back bracket on there maybe. I'll confirm that more as I go. This has had a water pump put in it in the past. You do see that, so someone has had the timing belt off of this. Okay, next I'm going to take and remove the alternator belt. As you can see, the bottom of the alternator has that one retaining bolt right there. Take and loosen that up. Then when you come up top, loosen that one retaining bolt there. And right back there by that hose is an adjustment. Maybe you can see it better now. Loosen up that adjustment screw, and you can remove the belt. Okay, I got the alternator belt removed. Now I'm going to take and remove this motor mount bracket to give us more access. If you look back there, you see one retaining bolt, 18 millimeter. And here is one more 18 millimeter retaining bolt. Let's take and remove. This one retaining bolt here is the main reason I remove the refrigerant lines. It's usually rusted pretty good. The nut side of it's actually in the inner wheel well. Now, as long as you have you take and unplug your cruise control, you already have the cable disconnected. Now I got a ground wire, 10 millimeter retainer. Instead of fighting with the lines, just take and remove the cruise control. I don't want to tweak the coolant lines too much, trying to get that out. So it's just two retaining nuts for the cruise control bracket. And it's out of the way. Let's take and remove the cruise control altogether. Okay, so if you come over here in this right front inner wheel well, you take and remove this plug. You got a T50 retaining bolt for your motor mount. We're going to take one to zip that out. I know I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, guys, but I got it jacked up, so I'm not too worried about it. We're going to have to get to that exhaust manifold sooner or later. As you can tell, I'm avoiding it, but let's do it to it. In addition, we're going to have to remove this harmonic balancer. So we're going to take and zip that retaining bolt out. Bring this up on number 1 if you were just doing a timing belt. It's a 3/4 19mm. Okay, I got this one pulled pretty much all the way out, but you're going to need a harmonic balancer puller or a 3-position puller. And just take and leave the bolt in the crank and position your puller just like so and zip it out. Okay, and then what I do, I take and I lower the jack so I can access that retaining bolt right there on that lower bracket. Once I remove this bolt, then we can jack it up a little bit higher. Alright, we'll leave the back in. Alright, jack it up. A little more. Alright, hold up. Let's take a look. Alright, next we're going to take and remove the 2 upper retainers, and that'll take the upper timing cover off. Okay, once those 2 retainers are removed, take and uninstall the timing cover. Okay, once you get the engine jacked up high enough, it's going to fight you a little bit, but you're going to have to maneuver this bracket until you get it out. I know I make it sound a lot easier. This is going to be one of the hardest parts of the job. While we're here, I'm going to take and remove the lower cover as well. As you can see, the 1 retainer there. 1 more retainer right about there. 8mm. Okay, I lowered the jack a little bit to gain access to the 2 lower retainers. Okay, once you remove all 4 retainers, as you can see right here is the crankshaft timing mark. As you can see, it lines up with that boss on the block to that arrow. If you come up here, you'll see the 2 notches on the cams, one on the exhaust cam, one on the intake cam. On the sprocket it says 2.4 front, and then it says up with an arrow pointing up. And the back one says the same thing. Your 2 notches are lined up and your crank's lined up, you're on number 1. Okay, what I did before I loosened the timing belt tensioner, I took and I loosened the cam retaining bolts. I used my impact gun so I didn't turn the cams. Okay, then if you come down to the tensioner, as you see, I got a 5mm Allen wrench. And you take and you turn it counterclockwise, and it puts slack in the timing belt. That'll allow you to remove it. Okay, I'm going to take and turn the tensioner counterclockwise. That should give me enough slack. Move the timing belt from the cams. Now from around the water pump. Go underneath and take it off the crank. And voila. I'm going to take and finish removing the retainers from the cam sprockets. Now you want to put these on the same as you take them off. As you can see, this one doesn't have any markings on it. This is the back sprocket. This has been apart before, so it's saving me a step. As you see, someone already marked this one front. Okay, at minimum, for me to remove the cylinder head, I got to remove these two retaining bolts that go from the timing cover to the head. So I'm going to remove them now. 10mm. Okay. I do notice that the timing cover does interfere, so I'm going to start going a little bit further with removing that. As you see, it's cracked. It was cracked by the previous owner or repair shop. However, I'm going to take and remove the idler, time belt idler, and it's a T50 for that center retainer. Okay, with the idler removed and everything, as you can see, I got plenty of room and clearance to pull that head, maybe even put it back on. The next thing I was trying to determine whether or not I should just disconnect the manifold from the exhaust or from the head. So what I'm going to try to do, which you can see I did, I removed the 4 retaining bolts for the heat shield. I'm just going to take and remove that and see how easy the retaining bolts come out from the head. Okay, I just changed it up a little bit. I removed that heat shield, and what I noticed right away is that there's a crack in that exhaust manifold. You can see right above the oxygen sensor. So with that being said, I'm just going to take and remove the exhaust manifold from the vehicle anyway. So I'll leave it attached to the head and just remove the retaining bolts from the exhaust. So I'm pretty sure there's 4 of them. There's 2 here, 2 at the bottom. Okay, I got the exhaust all unhooked. If you come over here, you see I took off some coolant lines. They're all disconnected. There was 2 retaining bolts on this bracket that held it to the cylinder head. I got them removed. Also on the thermostat housing, I removed this heater hose here as well. Next, I'm going to take and remove the cams so I gain access to the head bolts. Prior to pulling the cams, I disconnected the cam shaft position sensor plug. As you can see, there's 2 retaining bolts. I'm going to finish removing them, place it somewhere out of the way so it don't get damaged. If you take notice, each one of these cam retaining caps are marked. If yours aren't marked, you're going to want to mark them so you put them back in the same order as you take them out. As you can see, this front one's one complete retainer for both cams, so that one's going to be hard to mix up. But as you can see, if you look from the passenger side of the engine, from the cam, where the cam sprockets were, this is going to be your left and your right. So your intake cam is your left cam, your exhaust cam is your right. As you see, I got L2. In other words, this front retainer is going to be L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, and then L6. Same thing with the exhaust cam. As I mentioned before, this is going to be 1 regardless, front and back. So this is going to be R2, R3, R4, R5, R6. So when you take these off, place them on a bench in the same order. Okay, once I removed all the cam caps, retainers, I was able to remove the cams. As you can see on these bolts, it's actually marked left and right as well, so you can use that as an indication. I just took and removed the head bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we're going to take and remove the head. A couple of things I didn't cover off camera was I disconnected the vacuum hoses going to the EGR, and a couple miscellaneous things in the back that we're just going to push out of the way. Yeah, let's see what happens. I left this bracket here as something to grab a hold to. Same thing with the thermostat housing. You can remove that, it's just a matter of preference. Oh yeah, she's under good. Just double check everything real quick. I'm not sure if there's another bracket that goes to the exhaust manifold from underneath. I'm hoping not. But there may be. What I found when I was fighting with it, I went underneath. I'm not going to take you underneath there with me right now. However, there's a bracket that goes from the engine block to the bottom of the exhaust manifold. I just took the retainer bolt from that bracket to the block out. I left the heat shield on the exhaust manifold. I was going to break the bolts loose, but they felt like they were going to break, so I'll just wait till I get it on the bench. So the exhaust manifold is still attached to the head, and I had to remove that retainer bolt from the block. So now I should be able to pull this head off. Trying to make sure I got everything clear so I can make a straight shot out. Let's try this again. Okay, I got the cylinder head over at the bench. I didn't clean it up or touch it yet. However, the first thing I went to go for was that number 3 cylinder. If you come here, I don't know if it's showing up in the camera. That looks like a crack. And if you come over to the number 2 cylinder, I see another crack as well. Number 1 looks good. Number 4 looks good. That looks like a crack in between the intake and exhaust valve. Looks like another crack there. And same thing on this one. Yeah, let me see if I can. Thought that was a carbon trace, but it's definitely a crack. Same thing. Same thing right here. See, this one's nice and clean. See another crack starting right here. This one looks good. That one looks good. You'll probably find that it's cracked right into the water jacket. Now, I did get some information from the previous owner. He did have a leaky heater core, ran it low on coolant, and did have a slight overheating problem. From what I gathered from this, is that it was just a little bit more than a slight overheat. But I guess we'll take a look at the block. I don't see anything obvious with the head gasket. Well, I guess we did on a number 4 cylinder. I don't know if I split that taking it off. I want to think. It does look like there might have been some leakage going on there, right, with the color?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is kind of odd that both sides are broken in that same spot. And these other ones are nice and clean. And you could actually take and this is like metal, you could take and bend it. So just taking that apart shouldn't have cracked that. So that is something out of the ordinary. Put it on the bench or something, or on the ground. This is my first time looking at the block as well with you guys. I don't see nothing offhand. But let me take a closer look and I'll be right back. I inspected the block pretty good. I don't see any obvious damage to the block. I'm going to clean it up and give you another update later on. It's clear we're going to need a head, so I'm going to see what I could do to round up a cylinder head. Now, stay tuned.